Mike here, CBI Off-Road. Today we're going to show you how to install our T3 Tacoma front bumper. Let's go ahead and get started. So first thing we're going to be doing is removing the grill. Pretty simple. We have two 10mm bolts up on top, and then we have two push clips, one on each side. So we'll go ahead and remove those. We'll pop it up, and then you just pull out, and this thing will pop right out. So next, we're going to be removing these two plastic pieces here so we can get back into our fogs. They do have a clip right here in the middle on each one. So we're just going to pop that clip out. And then this will just kind of fold and pop out. It's got a couple little small tabs, and that's it. So next, we're going to be removing our fog lights. So we're just going to unplug here, pull that off, and then we have a small Phillips screw right here on this back side, and there's just a single. Undo that, and the fog light comes right out. So next, we're going to be removing our fog light covers, this whole piece here. So they have a couple tabs around. So all you're going to do, you're not going to reuse these or anything, they can get thrown away. But I'm just going to push down, get a couple of them loose to where I can pull it out a little bit, and then you're just going to pull it, and the rest of them will kind of just come out with it. So we'll do that on this one real quick. Comes out just like that. So next, after we got the fog light covers out, we're going to take our center grill piece out. So this one comes out pretty easily. The bottom is the easier of the two. You can just kind of push in on it, and it just pops right out off of these clips. So we're going to push all these in off of there. You may need a screwdriver, but they're going to all come off pretty easily. And again, none of this stuff is getting reused, so you don't really have to worry about it getting damaged at all. Bottom loose. Now the top, you're gonna have to come in here and kind of pull down on that, and then you're gonna see your other clips here, and you're just gonna push in on those, kind of spread that, and they'll just come right off of there. So once we got that loose, we can kind of pull this out. You do have one clip holding the fog light harness on there, so we just need to get that out. It's just a small clip, has clips on each side. It pops out of there pretty easy. Once you get one side off, it really makes it a lot easier to get this thing out. You can undo the other side. We can pull this out and discard it as well. So once we have our grill pieces all out, we can start to unbolt all the small little 10mm bolts that are holding all the bumper on there. So we're starting with this one up in the fender well, and then we'll move along. If yours has a front valance, you got a couple more bolts along the bottom as well. So we'll start with this one, then we'll move along and get all of these out. Once we got all the bolts out of there, we can go ahead and remove this small clip. It's pretty simple. You're just going to twist it 90, and it's going to pop out just like that. And then you can kind of pop that back, and we can kind of pull our fender liner back out of the way. So next, we're going to find our cut line spot behind this fender. So there's a couple of clips behind this. You just got to pop out. You can see them right here. The main thing we need to find is where our bumper and fender meet right behind this. Let me get this one more out of our way. And we can see right here where our bumper and our fender meet together, and that's going to be our initial cut line. So once we find that, you're able to mark your fender, and then we'll tape it off and we'll show you how we do that. All right, so next, to get our cut line, we're going to go ahead and measure from the center of this bolt hole here up, and we're going to be an inch, right about an inch and a quarter is what your measurement's going to be. So let me see here. It's kind of hard to get in here exactly, but we're right about inch and a quarter from center of the bolt hole, again up to there. That's going to give us our initial cut, and we can go ahead and tape this off now. Once we have our mark made, we can go ahead and we're going to go ahead and run our tape from our mark here along to basically this bottom line of this part of the bumper. So we're going to go ahead, put our tape on. Match it up with our mark here, and we're just going to come around and follow it along this line. So this is just going to be an initial cut. We can always, we're going to cut below this line a little bit, and then we're going to work our way up to it to make sure that we don't cut too much, because obviously we can always cut more off. We can never add back. So this is just going to be our initial cut, and then we can kind of fine tune it from there. Once we got everything taped off, we're going to go ahead and get ready to cut this. We just use a 5-inch cutoff wheel, and then we also use a 5-inch sanding disc after the cut. So we'll go ahead and cut this thing first, and then we'll go ahead and move on to fine tuning it with the sanding disc. Got our cut done, bumpers off. Now you can see again, we cut below our cut line because again, we can always take more off, we can never add any. But basically the initial point where you're wanting to make it into is if we're right in here, you can see where the bumper and the fender meet, and we want to get right up to basically that corner in there. And so we're going to sand this up, you know, clean our line up and everything like that. And by the time we're done, we're going to be right up on the corner of that, and we can finish it off. All right, so we got our cut all done, got it nice and clean, even. And as we noticed, we got our cut right up to this kind of corner there. It's right about where we want to be. Again, that's why we do an initial cut and then we sand up to that point, because obviously we don't, again, want to take more off than we need to. So now that we got that right where we want it, we'll go ahead and clean up all the little debris and stuff like that, make it nice and clean. And then we can start moving on to the next steps. So to clean a lot of these lines, I'm just using a small deburring tool. You can use a razor blade, pretty much do the same thing. This just makes it a little bit easier. This outside, I kind of leave it alone. I just kind of run my fingernail across it just to make sure I got everything kind of pushed down, not such a sharp pointed edge to it. Or you can do just kind of the same thing with your kind of tool. And once you got it all cleaned up and you got all the little burrs and bits off of there, then we can go ahead and move on. So this next step is kind of optional depending on the color of your vehicle. This one's white, So when we put this bumper up here, we're gonna paint this area all here black, just so when we put the bumper on there, it kind of blends in. We don't have, you know, a bright white sticking out behind the bumper, stuff like that. Just gives it a little bit cleaner look. Again, this is just optional. If your truck's already black, it doesn't matter. If it's one of the darker gray colors, probably not gonna make a difference. So, but on this one where it's white, we're gonna go ahead and paint this. Next, we're gonna be removing our original crash beam here. Getting this little guy off. There's a couple small tabs on each side. There's one there. There's one underneath here. And there's one in the center there. So you can see those three. You just gotta pop those on each side. This little guy will come off. And then now we can get to our 3 bolts here on each side. Once we get those off, then we can get to the 3 bolts behind. All right, so once we remove the crash beam stuff, we are gonna wanna save the hardware because we're gonna reuse the nuts from it. Couple more things we're gonna go ahead and remove. These little small end pieces, which are gonna be a 17mm head nut there, one on each side, and then also our small factory tow hook here. We're gonna go ahead and unbolt that as well. All right, so next thing we're gonna do is we need to trim our factory skid plate. If you have just this thin kind of tin one, if you have a TRD Pro one, you don't have to do anything. So anyways, we're gonna just basically cut right along this line and kind of follow this, just below here. So we'll go ahead and cut it, and then you'll kind of understand exactly where we're talking. All right, so you can see where we kind of cut this guy. We'll now pull it off because we need to pull it off anyways to get to our sway bar mounts. Once we pull it off, then we'll take our sander and we'll clean it up, and then we'll spray it just so it keeps it from rusting. And so yeah, we'll go ahead and pull that off. So next, we got the skid plate off. We're gonna go ahead and unbolt our sway bar mounts here. So we're gonna take both the bolts completely out of there so we can get a bracket in once we get the bumper on. Pull those out of place. These are left and right specific, and they are marked on them, so if you get them confused, you can see an R on one and an L on the other. Next step, we're going to go ahead and trim our fender liners up. And so we're basically just going to kind of push up to here. We're just going to kind of follow this line with the body. So we'll go ahead and start up above. And we'll work our way down. And then we'll drill a hole right here and then drill a hole through the plastic, and we'll just zip tie that up. We'll have just kind of a nice clean line there. we got a drill, our hole drilled there, and our hole drilled here. We're just going to go ahead and push this through. So next step is we have some small brackets for our power steering cooler. We're going to shift it backwards. So we're going to take out 3 bolts. They're all 12 millimeter. You're going to have one here, and then back inside of here, we have one more back here. So we're going to start off by taking this one out. We'll move to the 2 front ones. A small bag of hardware that's going to have 2 of these tabs in there. You're going to have a small bolt washer, this rated flange nut. So you're going to have doubles of those. So we're just going to take our tab here. We're going to face it forward. We're going to put our new nut and bolt on the back side. Spin that on just kind of loosely by hand on each one of these front tabs. Then we're going to take our power steering cooler. We're just going to push it kind of back into place. We're going to reuse our original bolts for these 2 front ones. With these 2 in place, we're going to pull this forward a little ways. We don't want it to get too close to the AC condenser because we obviously don't want it to rub a hole in there. So we're going to put it right about where we have a decent amount, a little bit of room there. And then we're going to go ahead and tighten our back ones up once we have that in place. On each side, get the other. All right, and so our original rear one back here, it just gets pushed back. We don't need to do anything with it. It'll be fine sitting back there. These are the main ones. Everything's now held in place. So we're done with that and we move on. One of the other things we're gonna wanna do is we have these little tabs here. We're gonna go ahead and trim these off. I'm just gonna use a pair of tin snips, cut right through them. You can bend them over if you'd like as well. You know, smack them with a hammer, pry them over with a pry bar, whatever you want to do. We're going to cut them off with some tin snips. Now we'll just hit them with a little bit of paint, help keep them from rusting. So next, we're going to go ahead and pop a couple of these little tabs out. This one right here for a main bolt that's going to go through a bracket that we have here. These are just, they're not reusable afterwards. You don't got to worry about breaking them. Pop those out. There's one on the inside as well. You just take your screwdriver, pop it out just like that, and we'll repeat that on the other side. Next step, we're going to be putting our grill back on the vehicle. So we'll go ahead and it slides back on pretty easily. Same exact spots. You kind of hear it clip in. A couple clips across the bottom, you just kind of push in there. And then pop those over the top of the captured screw holes there. And then we can put our hardware back in. All right, so if you are using factory fog lights, we do have brackets to accommodate for the factory fogs. Using an aftermarket fog light, Baja, Rigid, something like that, you don't have to worry about this. So with factory fogs, we're gonna go ahead and trim these tabs off here. And so you can tell, we don't want to trim these ones, we want to trim these ones closer to the edge here. So we'll go ahead and, I just use a pair of dikes and just kind of clip them from the back and fold those over, and then we can finish taking the rest of that little spot off of there. And these are going to be pretty much hidden behind there, so you don't have to make these look just perfect or anything. Just kind of trim them off each side, get most of the excess off of there, and then we'll be good. All right, so once we got those tabs cut off there, take our brackets, and they're just gonna line just like that up. And so we got some small button heads here. They're gonna go through. Kind of loosely fit those. We don't want to tighten them down or anything yet. We're gonna fit them to the bumper and then adjust them, and then we'll tighten them down. We'll do that on each one. With our brackets on there, we can go ahead and put these in our bumper. You got a small bolt here, is a 1/2 inch head, and then a serrated flange nut. So we can go ahead and set that right in there. You can just tighten this up just by hand. We don't want it too tight because we're going to adjust it. And so then we can kind of move this forward, adjust it over, get it where we want it as far as forward position. And then we can take our 1/2 inch, we can tighten this part of it down. And then we can go ahead and adjust our height inside of there, and then we'll tighten these button heads down. All right, so once you have this adjusted where you want it in there, we can go ahead and tighten our Allens down. They're just a 5/32 Allen. And don't tighten these down too much because you are just tightening down on plastic. So if you tighten it too much, it's just gonna break those tabs off of there. So just a nice light amount of pressure on them, and then that should be there in place, and we'll repeat that on the other side. This bumper is not getting a winch or light bar or anything, but if we were putting a winch or a light bar in, we would want to put our light bar in first. You can see our tabs here where the light bar can slide in right there. We would put the light bar in first again, because once you put your winch in here, you're not really going to be able to get to the light bar or slide it in and out. So again, put light bar in and then mount your winch, and you'll be good to go. But again, we're not doing that on this bumper for this customer. So we'll go ahead and get this thing put on. All right, so we got our bumper on. As you could tell, we did have a friend to help. These things can get heavy, especially when you start getting a winch and stuff in there. So you're probably gonna want a friend to help you put it on there. But now that ours is on, we can move on to our brackets. We do have our front bolts here, just loosely installed, just kind of pulled against the face of the frame. So we're gonna go ahead and put our frame brackets in here. So this is the reason why we removed our sway bar brackets. So this is gonna slide right in. You're gonna have a longer bolt with the hardware that's gonna go through the frame with a strut washer and a serrated flange nut that's going to go on the inside. So we're going to loosely install those in place just by hand. And then we can go ahead and put one of our bolts back in for our sway bar mount, and we'll repeat that on the other side as well. All right, so we got our bolts through the bracket. We got one of our original sway bar bolts there. Now we can put our bracket back on, and that just slides over that. We'll put our other 14 back in there. And again, we're just gonna loosely install these. We don't want to tighten those all the way down yet until we get our bolts here, and then we get our bumper where we want it, and then we can tighten down everything all at once. All right, so we got our 4 bolts here, serrated flange nuts with a washer. They're gonna come right in here to our brackets. We're just gonna, again, loosely install these in place on both sides. And once we got those in, then we can go ahead, we'll put our bottom bolts in here, and we can adjust the bumper. We got our 1/2-inch bolts and serrated flange nut. We're gonna slide right in here through the bottom, come up. We're gonna loosely install this as well. So we're gonna be using this to adjust the bumper height. So we'll tighten it or loosen it depending on what we need. And then once we have this, our bumper height adjusted, we'll tighten down all of the rest of our bolts. And then we'll go ahead and pull these back out and put kind of a spacer in there, and we'll tighten them back down. Now that we have our bumper on there, we got all of our brackets, everything in place, everything's bolted, just loosely installed. We can go ahead and adjust the height of our bumper. So this side is actually sitting pretty well, fit about a finger in there. You want anywhere from about 3/8 of an inch to 5/8 of an inch, depending on how hard you wheel your vehicle, because this bumper will flex and touch this if you have it too tight. We definitely don't want it touching. That's not gonna be good. It's gonna rub, it's gonna make noise, stuff like that. This one is sitting pretty well right there, about a finger's, length there. So we're gonna actually probably tighten this side down first, then we'll adjust the other side and make sure it's the same, and then we can go ahead and move on and kind of tighten the rest of the brackets down. This bumper is pretty well set in place, but just to show you, this bottom bolt that we put in is mainly there for adjusting the height. So if I needed this thing to come up more, we can go ahead and tighten this thing down, and it's gonna suck right up against there. So obviously we don't want it that tight, but that's just to show you that we can adjust this, up and down. So we're gonna loosen this back up, put it back in place, and we'll tighten this thing down, and then we'll show you the other brackets. We'll tighten those down, and we should be good to go. Our 2 outside bolts tight on the bumper. So we do have 2 inside ones that we're gonna go ahead and tighten down as well. And get in here and do these ones real quick. All right, so now that the bumper is tight, we can go ahead and tighten our brackets down. So I'm gonna start off with tightening our sway bar brackets back up, and then we'll tighten our 1 bolt through the frame, and then we'll tighten the 2 that go to the bumper. All right, now with the bumper on, we can go ahead and put our factory skid plate back on. We can go ahead and plug our fog lights back in. You just use the regular harness to get those plugged in. And if you're using an aftermarket harness, obviously you can plug those in whenever as well. We can now put our faceplate on. You're gonna get some of these little hooks here with the nut on the backside, and they're just gonna slide right over onto the holes that we have here. We'll just kind of smack those into place. There are going to be 6 of them on the steel bumper. On an aluminum bumper, you're only going to have 4 of these. If you had a winch and you had a synthetic rope winch, which means it's probably not spooled from the factory, you're going to want to put your feed through your fair lead, and then once it's through your fair lead, you'll route it through your faceplate, and then just kind of set these off to the way, and then you can go ahead and install your synthetic line, depending on the make. However they have you mounted in there. Once it's mounted in there, then you can go ahead, put your faceplate on, put your fair lead on, and finish that up. Since we do not have a winch, we're going to go ahead and install our faceplate. I'm just going to start putting this top middle one in first. Just kind of lightly run it in there. Go ahead and do the bottom middle one as well. Then we can go ahead and finish off putting the rest of the other ones in. All right, so one of the last things are adjusting bolts here on the bottom. So you can do one of two things. You can pull these out if you really want to. They're not necessarily required, but what we like to do is put a couple spacers in there to take up the space if you have any left between the bottom of our bumper and the frame, and then just tighten it down. So, but I would not tighten it down without a spacer in there, because you could potentially suck the bumper up, and then, you know, it could work its way tighter or looser, whatever it may be. So we're gonna pull these out. We're gonna throw some washers in there, and then we're gonna tighten them back up. All right, so I got a couple washers in there. Now I can go ahead and put my bolt back through. We can go ahead and tighten this down. So that takes care of the installation of our CBI T3 front bumper on the Tacoma. If you guys have any questions or concerns, you can give us a call or email us here at CBI Offroad. Thanks.